The core goal of this video is to get you to pay attention to what you're consuming with your audio. Since the beginning of the pandemic, people have been acutely aware of what they're consuming through media. Social media, YouTube, TV shows, Netflix, whatever they subscribe to. They have screen time trackers on their phones, laptops, tablets, but people don't spend as much time thinking about what they're consuming through sound. The passive consumption of sound is at the detriment of your mental health and society as a whole. If you're watching this video, you probably already know the concept of the attention economy. The largest corporations are paying brilliant people a ton of money to create algorithms that hold your attention so that you can watch more ads or pay for their subscription services. Most of what people think about when they think about these algorithms are the things that they actively engage in, which is scrolling, doom scrolling, watching videos, passively sitting on your couch and watching things, lying in bed watching things. But I don't think people think about the fact that these algorithms are equally as in place and in some ways are more powerful when applied to audio because you consume it more passively and often for a longer period of time. There's a time and a place, there's ways to do it that are more safe and healthy to engage with, but I think that people are really shoving themselves into lifestyles that are not as present or engaged and are not living their lives the way that they need to be. I'm speaking about this on first-hand experience. The past couple of years, my mental health has deteriorated along with the state of the world. I've been making a lot of changes to try to get my life to be better and be closer to the way I want to be living it. And honestly, a lot of it started with taking my AirPods, my headphones, off of my keychain. If you think about the active engagement that's required for watching something, sure, you could watch a TV show and have TikTok on your phone and scroll at the same time, but depending on what your job is, you can do work, you can study while listening to music or podcasts, you can drive, be on public transportation, out in public, exercising, you can passively consume media. I think that passiveness, frictionless, and invisibility of this audio consumption is part of the reason why nobody's thinking about it. With screen time, people have thought of solutions to reduce consumption. There are kind of software side approaches and hardware side approaches. I think that what happens in those cases is that people end up being a little bit more patient, but still engaging with things for as long as they would have otherwise. For the software side, there's, for example, screen time trackers that are on a lot of your devices. There's third-party softwares like Rise or OneSec, which makes you wait and take a breath before you open your phone, similar to those alarm clocks that make you solve a puzzle to open your phone. It's just one extra threshold of difficulty to engage with the platform. I thought a good idea would be to use this accumulation feature. The amount of time that you wait in between instances that you open the app increased by 6 seconds every time you opened it. So by the end of the day, if you'd opened it 10 times, you're waiting for over a minute. But what happened was I would just not close my phone anymore. I would leave it open on the YouTube app. The human mind subconsciously is very powerful. We are good at creating workarounds. We're good at solving problems that we shouldn't be solving. We're creative creatures by default, and we're almost too smart for our own good in some ways. So remember that. But all this is to say, I think a lot of the software solutions are easily worked around, and it comes down to your own intrinsic desire to change and habits more than anything. And that's really hard to engage with if you don't do it deliberately and in small doses. And that's where the hardware solutions kick in. So for example, I have these two different devices here. This is a lockbox, which many of you have seen before. This one's particularly small, but still large enough that I don't want to bring it with me when I'm going to work in places that aren't my apartment. It's kind of like a last-second crutch device that I can throw my phone in and stop worrying about my phone for a little bit. And it has nice accessibility if you need to answer a phone call or something. You can look like a fool, but not be engaging with Instagram unless you really want to climb into the crevices. It's not something you actively reach for. The week you buy this thing, it kind of changes your life, and then you just never want to engage with it again. The activation threshold is too high. You always need it near you. The what-if factor of digital FOMO is so powerful that you just don't want to use it. This is the Brick. It's basically an NFC chip with a little magnet on the back. Just tap your phone against it, and it activates Brick mode. Brick mode blocks you out of certain apps in between periods of time where you tap your phone. You tap your phone to the Brick, it starts Brick mode, and you can't access Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Then when you tap it again, you gain access to those apps. There's an emergency bypass, but if you emergency bypass too many times, it bricks the device, and you need to buy a new one. I'm not exactly sure. It is exactly the same as a lockbox. The digital things, like our minds just get too lazy to use it. It's just a Band-Aid solution. It's not teaching you how to use your devices less. I think some people can start working and put their phone in the lockbox, but for me, that was an active engagement for a week, and I was trying to turn it into a habit, but it never ended up developing that way. Life has too many distractions. There are too many what-if moments that I don't want to miss out on. I always feel like I need to have my phone with me, and I don't want to be that person. But I just know that these aren't solutions that are going to work for me, and if you're watching this, maybe they're not solutions that will work for you. But try it if you want to. With visuals, I think people have been curating art that they can experience whenever they want for the majority of recorded human history. Even prehistoric people, ancient people, had cave art to tell tales and pass on messages, remind each other of things, trade documents that have been passed down that are 5,000 years old plus, religious texts, whatever. With audio, people have been making music for as long as we can remember. I think part of language, and a lot of languages still have a very melodic aspect to it, but recorded sound only existed in the form of scripture or through oral history passed down through generations, and that was something that you needed to either actively consume or actively create to engage with. This was true until wax cylinders and all of these different devices in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that was still a very active experience because you had a very small period of time that you could record music and listen to. Something like a vinyl is like half an hour per side. That's still something you often listen to out loud and shared with other people. You would have less than half an hour of music on each side before you had to actively engage with it. It forced silence upon you as long as you weren't actively waiting for the moment to go flip the disc. And I think that that moment gave you the chance to evaluate what you were going to do next, whether you were going to flip it, whether you even liked what you were listening to in the first place, right? That's crucial. That's something that doesn't come up when we're swiping and there's just immediately some other context or it starts repeating. There's no time for you to think. We have the Walkman with tapes that force you to rewind. Fast forward into the digital age. When Napster came out, LimeWire, and then digital things like iPods or other MP3 devices, that was a turning point where people could really plug in and have access to their own sonic world on the go, wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And that stopped people from having to think as much about what they're processing. But at the same time, that was still a very curated experience. What they were listening to was something that they actively decided to listen to. You had to download it. You had to buy it. You would go to a store, you would talk to someone, or you would have your friends recommend you something explicitly. And you would think, yes, that is something I want to engage with. This is part of a social conversation that I want to engage with. Let me learn about it. Let me dig into it. And let me then inherently reflect on it when the album was over. When I reached the bottom of my iTunes playlist, that's it. That's the end of all of the content you have access to at that point in time. It's a beautiful thing that we have access, and it's easier than ever to learn about your preferences and also create and share what you make with the world. But I think that it is overwhelming, to say the least, right? I think everybody has had this thought that there's just too much. Nothing that I consume is an experience I can share with 99% of the people in my life because there's so much. And I don't want to miss out on the things that I have found that are meaningful to me. That's its own can of worms that we'll get to in a second. One of the core reasons I wanted to make this video is because I have been trying to process my emotions differently. I've been in therapy for a decade, and I feel like I've been using therapy as a mechanism to output my emotions without processing them myself. I would try to use my therapy sessions as efficiently as possible. I would show up with notes and I would basically say, hey, I want to spend 15 minutes on this section, 15 minutes on this section, 15 minutes on this, then ask me questions or whatever. It's bizarre, but I would then afterwards try to spend an hour in silence or journaling and processing my emotions from the session. When I did that, that was the most growth that I engaged with. When I've talked to friends about therapy in the past, this is the method that I implore them to explore because it's just a better use of your time, it's a better use of their time, it's a better use of your money, and it's just a faster way to understand yourself and your emotions. Recently, I've been going through a lot, and I stopped therapy a little while ago. I found myself falling into the exact opposite rabbit hole, which is the moment I was sitting with my own thoughts, I wanted to nerf them. I wanted to completely nullify all of the pain, and it's the most cliche of all time. Healing is hard. Healing is painful, but if it wasn't difficult, it wouldn't happen. It is that dissonance of what you are experiencing. It's that dissonance of the loss of the emotions that you've been going through with the way that you know the future has to be that you want to avoid. And I think people use all sorts of vices to cope with this. Not everywhere all over the globe and not throughout the entirety of human history, but pseudo-universally, alcohol has been a solution for painful moments. It's a Band-Aid. You go through a breakup, something terrible happens to you, and you just want to drink to avoid this. There are a lot of recent studies, I'll try to put one up here if I remember, about how Gen Z drinks less alcohol than any other generation at that era of their life. My initial thought was that it's about how there's a lot of research that's been published on how bad alcohol can be for you. But I think people might even be coming back to smoking cigarettes, and a lot of people know that in some ways that's worse. In some ways, alcohol is worse. I think what the real issue is that there's just a more accessible vice to nullify your emotions, which is the digital world. Instead, you can stay at home and isolate and just feel safe and warm, but you're missing out on humanity. I'm not saying at all that anyone should drink. I just think that we need to start thinking of media consumption as a vice. And I think we do that with visuals, but we don't do it with audio. I think this consumption spans past what people typically associate with using a vice. Normally, people who are drinking for a vice would thrash and chug a bunch at once, but it's not something that you have access to throughout the day. If you're at work, maybe some people who've really been going through it are going to the bathroom and chugging a little shooter or whatever. But I think our micro listening to supplement our need for human connection and stop us from feeling isolated and lonely seeps in ways that you aren't thinking about. I'm trying to more actively think about it in my life, but it's hard. It's hard to recognize something's happening when it's happening. I've noticed myself in the past couple of years, every once in a while, or maybe sometimes often, doing this terrible habit of when I'm brushing my teeth, I'll let an Instagram reel loop 4, 5, 6 times just because it was not egregiously painful to listen to. I have my hands occupied with dental floss or my toothbrush, and I just don't want to sit with my thoughts. You know, it's easier to have an ad coming through my head, whether it's for a band putting out their own thing or someone preaching an individual therapy concept. I see the irony of what I'm doing now, but sometimes you sit on a good note and it does let you repeat to the point where you can process it. But most of the time, I just want anything in my head so that there's not nothing in my head, or else there will become something in my head that I don't want to be there. It's way easier to flush things through than to have things marinate and start to sink in. And I think that's the fear that I have for myself and the world at large right now. All of this is to say it's not about information or entertainment, it's about avoiding emotional processing. I think that's the thing we need to focus on. Maybe this is a ridiculous example, and it's partially because I live alone, but I haven't done laundry without headphones in years. Probably 3 years before, a month ago. And then I was thinking about that exact fact, and I took off my headphones, and it's ridiculous, but I literally heard the sound of 2 socks rubbing together. Spoiler alert. That's a beautiful, subtle little sound that I have been missing, and it's kind of a nothing, but in a way, it's like ASMR. Soothing sounds that are not harsh in any of the frequency range that I think we miss out on our day-to-day life that are supposed to be there to ground us. These are ways that we feel physically our place in the world. It's so simple, and it's something that people completely take for granted if you're trapped in distractions. I'm not saying you need to hear every single sock get put into another sock or something, but use that metaphor for anything and everything in your life. The sound of things cooking in your kitchen, the sound of water running over your ears in the shower if you're absolutely devious and wear headphones in the shower. Technology is evolving faster than our biology and society. We can't necessarily slow it down. There will be people who are pushing it for the sake of academia, for the sake of pushing humanity, for the sake of greed. I don't want to say it's also on us, but we can do our best to try to keep ourselves sane and grounded and healthy and live fulfilling lives. If it's not obvious, this video is more for me than for you, but hopefully you enjoy it too. Like any habit or vice that we use to comfort ourselves, our tolerance grows. So the more we use this tool, the more that's required to get the same dopamine rush. We need to become more cognizant of how much we're consuming, or else we're going to keep plugging in more and more and be able to tolerate less and less undesirable, painful moments of silence where we're forced to sit with our thoughts and understand what is going right and wrong with our lives, and if we can actively engage with how to change it. Listening to things nonstop prevents reflection. Your brain has no time to process or emotionally regulate everything that you just went through, whether you were listening to or watching something or actively engaging with the world, living your life. It stops you from emotionally regulating. So if you're feeling something, you should be able to feel more joy or understand the pain. My friend sent me a podcast recently, also ironic, but it was very intentional, deliberate listening. One of the key points they made was that anxiety management is a skill, right? It's a muscle that you can flex. It's muscle memory that you can grow and train like anything else, like riding a bike, like lifting weights. We forget that muscles atrophy over time, but once you learn how to ride a bike, you might be rusty if you take a couple of years off, but you never forget. That's the expression and the mentality. I think it's not even that we're flexing the muscle, we're just outsourcing those emotional reps and hoping that the problem gets solved without us even looking at it. Sometimes that does happen. A lot of pain in life are things that are completely out of your control and things that you just can't engage with in any way. So sometimes it is best to just let things fly away, but even in those cases, it's important to take the time to sit there and understand that whatever happened is not your fault. And if you don't take the time to do that, it's like you felt the pain and then it's gone. There's no moment of realizing that it didn't exist for a reason that was in your control. Coming to terms with it is important for growth in case something else happens again in your life. The more you deal with, the easier it is to deal with more. This is also another huge point I wanted to talk about, which is the concept of parasocial relationships. I think people think about them in a very narrow way right now, which is the historic lens of, for example, celebrities or like monarchs, religious leaders. You had these idols and people looked up to them and felt a kinship with them, and there were stalkers and whatever. There's a modern day equivalent of, for example, celebrities, politicians for some reason, your favorite musicians, podcasters, and particularly things like live streamers or YouTubers. People that have a strong online presence, show their face a lot, and people latch onto them and feel truly less lonely when they're with them, watching them in this one-sided parasocial relationship. This conversation is often thought about with people who share themselves a lot and in ways that are portraying themselves as a friend. But I think even the familiarity of things like TikToks or Instagram Shorts satiates our need for human desire just enough for us to not reach the activation energy required to engage with people in our real life. If you're scrolling through YouTube Shorts and you encounter someone you're not even subscribed to, you don't know their name, you don't know the name of their channel, but you are familiar with them, it's comforting. You might even end up liking the video before, I like double tapped. You might end up liking the video before you even know what the video is about, just because you're like, it's my old friend. This is a habit that I've seen myself do many times. And I'm always like, I can't believe I'm doing that. But, you like these people and you know that the content is probably going to be something that you like based off of the fact that you've engaged with it in the past. But I think subconsciously you're getting a secondary rush, not because you like the content, but because you like the person delivering the content. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm like, please like and subscribe. But I think the issue is that we do that all day, baby. Like we do that all day. And I think people do that to the detriment of their actual potential relationships in the real world. If you are getting your need for human connection entirely satiated through YouTube Shorts, pay attention. We're satiating our need for human connection in a way that is just so one-dimensional and one-sided, and it's not talked about enough. And I think that this really exists in the world of podcasting as well. If you're listening to a podcast about academia or video games or sports or movies or beauty or dating, we form relationships with the people who we engage with, whether you're listening actively or passively. The people who are giving you this information. If it's one person and revolving guests, one person alone, or a whole crew of people that you're considering your temporary friend group for the time period that you're consuming this media, it's tricking our subconscious that we've proven for the day that we have interacted with people in a way that is meaningful and fulfilling. And I think that it is there to fight loneliness. Not only is it one-dimensional and one-directional, so if they decide to end the podcast, you're shit out of luck. We're tied to these people with FOMO. We want to make sure that we catch every episode. Even if the topic is not interesting, you'll push through because you're like, I need to make sure I'm up to date on all the inside jokes with my friend group. This is my own isolation speaking, but I'm sure for some of you, this is something that you've engaged with as well. I think we're also active curators of these experiences, so it's creating an echo chamber in terms of all of the perspectives that you're getting on the world, whether it's the lens of the news that you're understanding through them or their political views, the people that they platform, is creating microcosms of self-identification that are completely unnecessary and oftentimes lacking a secondary perspective to provide critical thinking in a conversation, in a dialogue, in just life. It's painful, a lot of times people don't want to listen to something that has opposing views because then you have to think even more to keep up and rationalize things one against the other. Even in situations where multiple perspectives are present, there's not a moment that media providers provide you to reflect. There's no time embedded into these mediums to reflect on the things that we're consuming. Even with multiple perspectives, it's just in one ear and also in the other ear, and then they're just jumbling around and then they leave when you're on to the next thing that you're consuming. I think some people can maybe take a second and process that, but then you're also missing out on the new information coming in. What we really need, as silly as it sounds, is like a Dora the Explorer-esque, what do you think about this moment where it's just then silent? What do you think? Do you think this is a good idea? Yeah, I thought so. It's bizarre. In school growing up, class is where you're learning the surface level material and can learn how to point in the right direction. The reason we have homework is engaging with things later to actually understand, interact with, and reflect on what you're learning. It's the reason that there's labs in science classes. Even in labs, you're allowed to ask questions and actively engage. Here, sure, you can leave a YouTube comment, but it's not the same. You can't say, wait a second, I don't understand. You don't have the moment to think about all of the different edge cases and what ifs that would maybe cause your perspective and understanding of how the world works to be different than the verbatim definition of what people are providing you. There's this concept with drugs of chasing the dragon, but I don't think it's necessarily about it being the first time. It's about being the first time in a while. Music is so much more enjoyable after you've given your ears a rest. We're also just so much more attuned to the nuances of music after a rest. I used to live in Vermont, and my friends and I would go to the mountains for hiking, snowboarding, camping, whatever. And while we were there, we would try our best to not actively engage with any kind of media consumption. Listening to music out loud through speakers looked down upon because it disturbs other people's hikes, it disturbs the wildlife. On the way home, the music that you listen to, like, slaps. Everything sounds so good because you've been in silence and you've let your ears rest. It's the same sensation as the sleep that you get in a hammock or a tent. Difficult, but insanely rejuvenating. And then the first night of sleep that you get back in your bed, you're like, damn, this is nice. On a similar note, audio engineers, people who listen to and edit music professionally, will give their ears a rest. When they're editing a song, they'll try to get as much done as they can, and then they'll say, I'm just making smudgy changes. I kind of know what I'm looking for, but not really. Let me take a breather and come back to this with a fresh perspective, with fresh ears, and be able to really appreciate it for what it is and not be nitpicking the wrong things, because your taste changes when you're embedded in something to the point where you lose sense of the meta emotion or of the meta message that it's trying to get across. Take a break, come back and enjoy things more, and you can be more deliberate about it when you do return. This is my first YouTube video ever, and I would be remiss if I didn't include this, so I'm going to probably speed through this like a medical ad. The World Health Organization said that 1+ billion young people are at risk of hearing loss from unsafe listening. Safe listening volume is about 80 dB for 40 hours a week, or 90 dB at just 4 hours a week. AirPods max out at 110 dB. Wearing earbuds for an entire day can increase things like ear irritation, wax impaction, infection, and increased cortisol from chronic loud sound. And note that high cortisol leads to things like worsened focus, sleep, and immune function. Like the default listening with AirPods, an hour is already enough to destroy your hearing. You can go into your phone or computer settings and change the maximum volume output that it allows through headphones. And I highly recommend that you do this. You don't necessarily need to stick to these particular thresholds, but just lowering it from the max, especially in situations where you don't need it, like on a loud train or in an airport or something. Why not stop yourself from accidentally harming yourself and also getting used to the louder volume, which makes you want to keep listening to it at louder volume, because coming down drips less dopamine into your blood. It's less exciting for your body to listen to quieter things. So if you're used to it at just even 5 dB less, you're not going to notice a difference. But when you come down that 5 dB, it feels less exciting. So just get used to it at a point where it's only hurting you a little bit instead of a lot. This is something I really want you to think about. For a lot of people, the first time in the day that they sit with their emotions and process whatever happened to them that day is when they lie down for sleep. Not when they lie in bed, not when they go to bed, but when they're actually done doom scrolling, listening to that last word of the podcast, or done with their Kindle and they toss everything to the side. And then that moment where you close your eyes and have made the decision, I'm going to try to sleep now, that's when all of the emotions flood in. That's the floodgates of your mind opening, being like, is it all gone? Can we get in there now? That is, I think, the source of a lot of people's insomnia. It's one of the big sources of mine, holding back the floodgates and pushing back my queue of emotional processing until the moment where I allowed it to come through, which was the moment that I needed to be recharging for the next day so that I'd have less emotional processing to go through. We need to be able to decompress from constant input throughout the day. A lot of people will say that you need to give yourself at least an hour of no screen time before going to bed to have quality sleep, but I think that they don't include audio in this. Music therapists use more calming music at lower decibels to help you fall asleep and feel safe and not be as freaked out about the ambient sounds of your world, like the rustling of leaves outside your apartment, the creaks of your pipes, or your neighbors. It's okay to drown these out to a certain extent. Make sure you're doing it at a responsible volume and listening to something that is not going to incite your mind to think about even more. be conscious and deliberate. If you're listening to slow music, classical, jazz, whatever, before bed, your mind is more likely to be soothed. But if you're listening to a conversation, even if it's not about something that's super intense, your mind thinks that there's people around that you are actively engaging with, whether or not you've said something, they might want your attention. That is part of what's keeping you up as well. Knowing that you might be socially obligated to interact with other people in your space, and you're not paying attention to those people. I also see the irony of this, but I wanted to quickly talk about the dopamine rush that you get from constantly filling your mind with these self-help videos, stopping you from actually making the changes that they're trying to provoke. No matter what I say, this video isn't going to change your life unless you go out and do shit, you know? That's the way. It's 10 years in therapy, but never activating any of it outside of the sessions. You have to embed the lessons. You have to play the guitar. You can't just watch tutorials. Everything that you do in your life, you have to actively engage with to grow from it. Maybe the reason you found this video is because you're in a self-help YouTube video era, and as someone who went through that for way too long, and still does from time to time, it's not about waiting to find that one video that's going to give you the cure. Maybe this is it for you, but the cure is instilling the advice. The classroom can teach you all that you want to know, but it's really just what to Google, what to ask ChatGPT about, and how to have a perspective of how to pursue your actual learning, which is done through action. Constant audio input drains dopamine, and I think this stops yearning. People are yearning to yearn these days. There's a healthy amount of rumination, like manifesting, yearning, inner goal chasing, and dreaming that is important for growth. I think that constantly listening to audio stops you from yearning, and I think people underestimate the value of yearning. It's dreaming. It's having something to work towards and manifesting or actually envisioning how to get there. If you are filling your mind constantly, you're not thinking about the micro steps. You can only think about the macro steps when you give yourself a break, but you need to be thinking about the micro steps throughout the day, and those are the tangible moments that get you to where you need to go. Instead of ruminating on how we can actually make these small tangible steps throughout our life, we're just suppressing our emotions. We're delaying our emotional processing for later and building up that queue that stops us from sleeping at night. It's a two-step process, and the first part is really painful. That's the grief of realizing that you are going through something. Your problem's scope and scale can change throughout your life, throughout every single day, but realizing that they're there and realizing that they're hard and you have to put an effort to change them is a sad and painful realization that you're going to have to keep going through for the rest of your life. But it gets easier the more you do it. When you do get through the grief of realizing that there's this growth that needs to be done, that's where the yearning can kick in. And the yearning is kind of a drug in and of itself, but more in a positive way. And I think some people can become addicted to yearning. Yours truly. It's like paying someone to electroshock stimulate your abs instead of actually doing a crunch. Maybe there's some abstract way where it helps reduce the amount of time it takes for your muscles to heal, but you're not actually engaging the muscles through the stimulation. It requires the fibers to be tearing in order to grow back stronger. And that takes physical effort. You can push things off as much as you want, but you have to be there to pick them back up. These are tools that can be used for everything from information input to sensory regulation to hearing aids. AirPods put a particular type of hearing aid that costs around $8,000 out of business because you can just do that with $200 AirPods. It's not cheap, but it's way cheaper than the alternative. There are new features that are coming. I've been using a lot of Mac products lately, and it's rumored that the AirPod Pros 3 are going to have live translation, so you can talk to people while wearing your AirPods, and when they communicate in another language, it'll play their voice in your native language and vice versa. Living somewhere metropolitan like New York City, you really do encounter a lot of people who don't speak the same native language as you. I'm lucky enough to have been born an English speaker. Here, the majority of people do speak my native language, but I have a lot of friends who don't speak English as their first language, and we communicate incredibly well. I love my homies, but there are things that they probably want to say, and I want to say to them that are prohibited because of the lack of depth of our communication that we want to be able to say in real time. These devices are getting lighter and comfier, the battery lives are getting longer, and there's going to be less and less of a reason for us to take them out of our ears. Transparency mode is already pretty incredible, and you can have a full conversation with someone basically as easily as without them in. We're entering this cyborg adjacent era where there's fitness trackers and different kinds of controls. I'm a virtual reality developer, and I'm wearing augmented reality goggles throughout the day. I see times and places for people to be living a Luddite lifestyle, but I also see these exponentially increasing their use case and prevalence in the world. People wearing headphones is not going away anytime soon. Even with things like Neuralink, it's terrifying. But I think that there's a high likelihood that we are truly entering a cyborg era. I think we're really becoming cyborgs, depending on your definition of it. But to me, living your life with technology augmenting your experience and sensory inputs at any point in time is what a cyborg is. Not living and engaging with the world purely through our own bodily functions. Anything that is augmenting it is cyborgifying yourself. The key is to realize that I'm not preaching purism. I'm not preaching that we should become Luddites. I'm preaching intentionality. We're going to be engaging with these technologies for decades, if not hundreds of years, if humans continue to exist for that long. To live a really fulfilling life, we need to change the way that we think about and interact with these technologies that are ambiently going to be part of our existence. So what can we do? The simplest thing is the noise fast. Just try once a day to sit in silence. This is a step before meditation, and I think this is really a lot of the benefit that people get from meditation. It started for me, as embarrassing as it is, with stopping showering with headphones in. There was a period of time where I was doing that, and I was washing my hair like this, washing my face. There was too much for me to emotionally process at the time, and I was doing every possible thing I could to stop myself from being present with it. And I think for a lot of people, the shower is that sacred place where they can process before bed, so it's a little easier to get in there. And when you don't even have that buffer, it's hard. Try brushing your teeth, try cooking, try folding laundry. One task each day without headphones in. And if you have them in, actively take them out. If you can figure out how to Pavlovianly remind yourself when you're entering your home after a day out and you're wearing headphones when you enter to take them out, even just for a moment while you take off your shoes, while you figure out what you're supposed to do next, that decision-making process of what you're going to do next will be so much easier and clearer, and you'll be so much more confident with your approach to it. No matter how simple of a task it is, if you give yourself the moment of silence to reflect on what you came from and where you're going. This is a little silly math. If you're doing a chore that takes 5 minutes without headphones on and 10 minutes with headphones on, you might feel like it takes lower effort to do it with the headphones on, but you're then missing 5 minutes that you could be spending with loved ones or learning something or just enjoying something more actively than just like passing time as quickly as possible. You can set automations and reminders to check in on yourself. Say at 7 p.m. every day. Say, hey Siri, I don't want to trigger it, but at 7 p.m. every day, remind me to stop using my phone. People don't set alarms for these kinds of behavioral tactics to remind themselves, but I'm hoping that platforms engage with and create monitoring systems for users to understand their consumption and how to be more deliberate about how they're living their lives. Also, the older I get, the more I think about things like Shabbat, Friday night into Saturday night, sunset to sunset. If you are a religious Jew, will not use modern technology or anything that is considered work. It's literally a deliberate day of the week where you give your mind a tea break from modern society. You engage with your loved ones, you do hobbies and habits and play together in a way that is nourishing for community and stops you from building these habits and routines of escapism. It's forced presence once a week. And I'm not saying that you should do Shabbat. I'm probably not going to do it anytime soon in my life in the way that I'm describing. But I think that having a weekly routine of a particular activity that is longer form than these micro habits of not listening to things while showering or brushing your teeth or chores or whatever, a longer period of time that is dedicated non-listening time, non-phone engaged, but also non-listening, especially plugged in. Shared music out of a speaker is a little bit better. Unplugged time weekly is going to help heal you faster than you know. Lastly, this is a whole concept that I might try to make a separate video about, but I think that people are not conscious of their own personal audio spectrum. For example, you might be able to do certain types of work to certain types of music and other types of work to other types of music. You might lift weights to something more aggressive than you code to or file your taxes to or whatever. People might not be as attuned to what their actual thresholds are. You might be listening to content or music that's more engaging than allows you to actively engage with whatever it is that you're doing at that time. By multitasking, you're also not fully engaging with the medium that you're consuming. The stimulus might be so overwhelming that you're not doing a good job at listening to the lyrics of whatever song you're listening to, but you're also not doing a good job at cleaning the dishes. You're also not doing a good job at making sure you're feeling that mind-muscle connection when you're lifting weights. You can get things down and do things through muscle memory in a safe way that's efficient for your body and mind. But I just implore you to be a little bit more conscious with what you're consuming while also engaging with other activities in particular. Also, if you're listening to audiobooks, podcasts, long-form YouTube videos, for example, feel free to pause things, especially if it's as easy as clicking a headphone. Reflect, say things back out loud. That's what helps you absorb the information that you're learning and be able to recall it and implement it into your life. If you're just listening to self-help videos on loop, but not giving yourself the moment to make sure that you know what you're listening to, you're not going to learn it, you're not going to implement it, and you're not going to change your life. Lastly, I think if you are to do just one thing from this video, it would be these micro breaks. Once a day. That's all you need to start with. Maybe even a single minute. Unplug. Do nothing. If you find yourself meditating or even journaling, that's a conscious and active engagement with your reflection and your emotional processing. And that is a beautiful thing to do. But I think for a lot of people that sounds daunting. I think just 1 minute of feeling your emotions a day, if you don't normally let yourself do that, or wherever you're at, 1 more minute than what you've been doing gets the ball rolling towards living a more deliberate life. I really made this video more for me than for you. And through repeating it as many times as I tried to record this, through writing the script, I feel like I've learned a lot and implemented a lot of it into my own life. I hope this was helpful for you, and maybe like the video if it was. This is new for me. This is my first talking head scripted-esque video. It's fun. It's cathartic. I like this shit. So thank you for watching, and peace. I don't know what this was. Boop, 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 boop. Peace.